She was forced to marry a wolf who had just come back from war. They said he had spent so long in wolf form on the battlefield that he had forgotten how to be a man. He smelled like fresh blood and old silence, and he looked at everything around him like he was still waiting for something to attack. She was a white wolf who smelled like gardenias and believed in fated love. The bond chose him anyway, and now they will have to learn to make this marriage work, even though they couldn't be more different. Welcome to our channel. Tell us, where are you listening from today? The town of Harlan's Creek had a way of going quiet when something significant moved through it. Not the quiet of peace. The quiet of recognition, the kind that settled into the bones of every wolf who lived tucked among those Blue Ridge Mountains, hidden in plain sight behind gas stations and general stores and church socials that doubled as pack meetings. The humans who passed through on weekends never noticed, but the wolves always felt it when something powerful entered their territory. They felt Colt Ashvane before they saw him. Wren Calloway was in the garden behind the Calloway house when it happened. That low, resonant pressure in the chest that had nothing to do with the weather. She was on her knees in the dirt, pressing seedlings into the earth with careful fingers, when the sensation moved through her like a slow wave. She sat back on her heels, looked toward the road. She didn't see him yet, but something in her wolf went still, the way prey animals went still. Not from fear, she would think later. From recognition. She would not understand what that stillness meant until the evening meeting. The gathering of the Harlan Creek pack took place in the great room of Elder Moss's farmhouse, as it always did on the first Sunday of the month. Wren arrived with her mother, took her usual seat near the back, and tried to look like she wasn't watching the door. He came in at the last moment, and the room changed. Colt Ashvane was not the tallest wolf she had ever seen, but he was built like someone had taken the concept of endurance and made it into a man. Broad through the shoulders, deliberate in every movement, the kind of deliberate that came not from caution, but from years of training the body to make no unnecessary motion. His hair was dark auburn, the red only visible when the lamplight caught it, and his eyes were a color Wren had no name for. Brown, shot through with amber, warm in theory and cold in practice, like embers that had long since stopped giving heat. He had a scar along the left side of his jaw that hadn't been there when he left 3 years ago. Nobody embraced him. Nobody rushed forward. The pack acknowledged him the way you acknowledged a storm, respectfully, from a distance. Colt Ashvane scanned the room with the practiced efficiency of someone cataloguing threats, found none, and settled into a position near the wall with his back to it. Elder Moss cleared his throat. 3 years, the old alpha said. 3 years our pack sent one of its strongest to serve the Interpack Coalition. Tonight, we welcome him home. A ripple of murmured acknowledgement moved through the room. Not quite applause, not quite warmth. And tonight, Moss continued, we address the matter of reintegration. Wren's mother reached over and pressed her hand. Wren looked at her. Her mother's face was carefully arranged into something neutral. Colt Ashvane has served. He has earned his place and his right, but a wolf that has spent 3 years primarily in shifted form requires anchoring. Moss paused. The council has discussed this at length. A mate bond, properly formed, provides the strongest anchor a wolf can have. We have identified a compatible match. The room went very quiet. Wren already knew. She had known since her mother's hand pressed hers. She had known, she realized, since that wave in the garden, since that stillness in her wolf that had no name. Wren Calloway, Elder Moss said. She stood. Across the room, Colt Ashvane finally moved his eyes. They found her. And for one single suspended moment, the mate bond rose between them like a sound too low to hear, but too large to ignore. It moved through Wren's chest and lit something there, something warm and certain and terrifying in equal measure. She watched his face. She watched the moment he felt it too, and she watched him turn away, not slowly, not reluctantly. He turned his face away from her like she was a bright light, and he had chosen darkness, a deliberate, practiced refusal. The movement of a man who had learned that wanting things was the fastest way to lose them. The room breathed around them. Wren sat back down. Her mother's hand was still on hers, and Wren held it like a lifeline because her wolf was pulling toward him with a gravity she had not asked for and did not know how to resist. And across the room the soldier stood with his back against the wall and his eyes on the floor, and gave her absolutely nothing. 7 days, she thought. They had given her 7 days until the ceremony. She was going to need every one of them. And somewhere across that silent room, Colt Ashvane pressed his back harder against the wall and breathed slowly through his nose, and did not look at her again. Because looking had cost him something, and he had very little left to spend. The morning after the meeting, Wren brought him coffee. It was a small gesture, possibly a foolish one. She had knocked on the door of the guest cabin where he was staying, a spare property the pack kept for returning members, and when he opened it, she had held out the mug with both hands like an offering. He had looked at it for a long moment. Then he had taken it without a word. She stood on his porch and tried conversation. "I know this isn't what either of us chose," she said. "No. But I think if we're going to do this, we should at least talk about what we each need, what we're hoping for." He had been looking past her shoulder at the tree line. The morning light caught the red in his hair and turned it copper. He had a bruise along his collarbone that hadn't been there yesterday, new and dark against his skin. "I need quiet," he said, "just space. I don't need hope." She absorbed that. "Okay," she said, "I can give you quiet and space." She took a breath. "I can't promise not to hope." Something moved across his face, too fast to read. He looked down at the coffee. She left before he could tell her to. Over the next 3 days, she learned his patterns by accident. He rose before dawn. She knew because the cabin light was off when she woke, but the front door showed signs of recent use, a disturbed patch of mud, the faint impression of boots in the wet grass. He ran in wolf form at night, always returning before the rest of the pack woke. He ate alone. He spoke to Elder Moss once, a meeting that lasted less than 10 minutes and from which he emerged looking like a man who had been handed a sentence he did not intend to appeal. She tried once more the day before the ceremony. She left a plate of food on his porch. Nothing elaborate, just bread and cold cuts and the cheese from her mother's kitchen, the kind of spread you brought someone when words weren't adequate. When she came back an hour later, the plate was gone. The mug from 3 days ago was beside it, washed and dry and left at the door. She stood looking at the clean mug for a long time. It was not warmth, it was not softness, but it was consideration, the smallest, most minimal form of it. A man who had washed a mug instead of leaving it at the door dirty was a man who, on some level, had noticed her. She tucked that away. On the 4th day, she overheard him. She had not meant to listen. She had been passing behind the storage building on her way back from her mother's house when she heard his voice, low, flat, directed at Finn Barrow, one of the younger pack members who had been assigned to help Colt settle back in. "I'm not looking for a caretaker," Colt was saying. She's just Wren. She's kind. She'll give you room." "A garden wolf," Colt said. "That's what they're giving me. A garden wolf who smells like flowers and doesn't know what the dark looks like." Finn said something she couldn't catch. "A wolf like that isn't going to fix what war breaks," Colt said. "It doesn't work that way. Nothing works that way." Wren stood behind the storage building and pressed her back against the wood and breathed very carefully through her mouth. She did not cry. She was not, in that moment, particularly sad. She was something more complicated than sad, a mixture of anger and recognition, and the bone-deep ache of being seen only as her surface. The white fur, the flowers, the softness people had always assumed went all the way through. They were wrong, But she understood, too, that he didn't know that yet, that he couldn't know it. She pushed off the wall and went home and replanted the seedlings that had dried out in the afternoon heat, pressing each one into fresh soil with steady hands. And she thought, fine. He doesn't believe in this. That doesn't mean he's right. The ceremony was in 3 days. She was going to marry a soldier who thought she was ornamental, and she was going to prove, slowly and without announcement, that she was something else entirely. The dress had been her mother's. Ivory silk, simple cut, with small pearl buttons down the back that her mother's fingers had done up that morning in silence, the kind of silence that was its own form of love, careful and unhurried. Wren had stood in front of the long mirror in her childhood bedroom and looked at herself and thought, well, here we are. She did not look like a bride going to meet her heart's desire. She looked like a woman walking into something she did not fully understand, which was, she supposed, the most honest thing she could have worn. The ceremony was held at the edge of the Calloway property, where the yard met the tree line. Pack tradition, the threshold between the domestic and the wild, the place where 2 wolves agreed to share both. A dozen pack members gathered. Not a celebration exactly, more like a witnessing. Colt arrived 4 minutes before the hour. He had cleaned up, dark shirt, dark pants, his jaw freshly shaved to reveal the full line of the scar. He walked with that same economical deliberateness she had already come to recognize. His eyes, when they found her across the gathered pack, did what they had done that first night, took her in, and then went carefully neutral. But she noticed the other thing, too. There was a new cut above his left eyebrow, fresh, maybe 12 hours old, the kind of cut that came from movement in wolf form at speed from brush or stone. He was fighting his own shift. She understood enough about long-term shifted wolves to know what that meant. The wolf and the man were not yet in agreement about how to coexist. He was holding himself together through will alone, and he was here. However reluctantly, he was here. Elder Moss spoke the binding words in the old language. Colt's hand was placed in hers, large and rough and very still. She could feel the slight tension in his fingers, the control it was costing him to hold a woman's hand without flinching away from the softness of it. The mate bond hummed at the point of contact, warm and immediate. She felt his hand tighten, just slightly, for just a moment. In the presence of this pack, Elder Moss said, and in the sight of the moon, do you hold to this bond? I hold, Wren said. A beat, then, I hold. Colt's voice was flat, but he said it. The pack acknowledged them. Her mother was crying quietly. Finn Barrow was looking at his boots. Afterwards, they walked to the house together. The farmhouse at the edge of the property with a wraparound porch and enough land for a garden. And Wren noticed that he kept exactly 3 steps of distance between them the entire walk, not hostile, measured. She began to understand that he measured everything. That night, she prepared the room they were meant to share. She had not expected anything. She had told herself that firmly several times. But there was still something that contracted in her chest when she came out of the bathroom to find him on the floor beside the bed. A blanket pulled from the closet, already settled with his back against the wall. He did not look up. She stood for a moment in the doorway, then she turned off the light and got into the bed and lay on her back in the dark and listened to him breathe. She didn't sleep for a long time. She lay in the dark and thought about what marriage was supposed to look like. She had grown up on the stories, fated mates, the moon's design, the bond that made 2 wolves more than they had been alone. She had believed in that with the open, uncomplicated faith of someone who had never been given a reason not to. The bond was real. She felt it even now, a warm hum at the center of her chest, reaching across the dark floor toward the man who had chosen to sleep on it. He was real. The bond was real. The rest of it they would have to build. She noticed eventually that his breathing had evened out. that he had at some point let his guard down enough to sleep. It wasn't much, but she decided to count it as something. 3 weeks into the marriage, Wren had established a rhythm. She rose at 6, made coffee, 2 cups, 1 left on the kitchen counter where he could find it, no expectations attached. She tended the garden from 7 to 9, planting and expanding rings around the property, gardenias closest to the house, then lavender, then wildflowers along the fence line that she had let go native and free. She ran errands for the pack in the afternoon, cooked dinner, left his portion covered on the stove if he wasn't back. He was never back for dinner. He returned, each evening, sometime between full dark and midnight, with whatever he had taken from the forest. He did not eat in wolf form, she had established that quickly, but he processed the day in ways that were more wolf than man, emerging from the tree line already half-shifted back, taking several deliberate breaths on the porch before coming inside. She did not comment on the animals. She had told herself she would not comment on the animals. On the 22nd day of their marriage, Colt Ashvane walked through the front door, carrying a boar. It was not a small boar. It had not been cleaned. He carried it over one shoulder with the ease of a man who had done this 1,000 times and saw absolutely nothing unusual about it, tracking blood across the kitchen tile, then along the cabinet he grazed with the boar's flank as he turned, then across the wall beside the back door, and finally, catastrophically, across the full length of the white curtains she had hung 3 days ago, when his elbow caught the fabric as he shouldered through. He made it to the back porch. Wren stood in the kitchen doorway. She looked at the curtains, at the tile, at the cabinet, at the wall. She counted to 5. She counted to 5 again. "No," she said. He turned from the back porch, looked at her. He seemed genuinely uncertain what he had done wrong, which was almost worse. "No," she said again, and this time her voice was not particularly quiet. "Colt, no, you cannot. This is a house. This is a home. I have spent 3 weeks trying to make it a home, and you cannot—" She stopped, breathed, started again, and this time the words came out faster, riding something she had been sitting on for too long. "I have been patient. I understand you hunt. I understand the pack, the instinct, everything, but you cannot walk through a house that 2 people are supposed to live in and leave it looking like this." She gestured at the wall, the curtains, the trail across the floor. "Like I don't exist in here. Like what I've done in here doesn't matter to you at all." He was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "I spent 2 hours on those curtains," she said. 2 hours choosing them and hanging them because I thought if I made this place feel like somewhere worth coming back to, maybe you would come back to it. Maybe you would come back to me." Her voice caught, just slightly. "I know that's not what you signed up for. I know you think I'm some garden wolf who doesn't understand what you've been through, who can't possibly—" She stopped herself before the words that came next, the ones that would have been too much. "Not like someone who's already decided they're not worth saving." She didn't say it. "I want a marriage," she said instead. "I need you to try. I need you to try to live here with me in this house, like a man who chose to come home." She looked at the curtains one more time. Then she turned. "I'm going for a run." She went upstairs, changed and walked out the front door without slamming it. She had never been a door slammer, even now, even with the white-hot frustration in her chest. She crossed the yard, hit the tree line, and let the shift take her. It was a relief, as it always was, the change from skin to fur, from one kind of knowing to another. The world opened up in the dark, enormous and scented and entirely indifferent to marriage problems. She ran. She ran further than she meant to. This was the mistake she would understand. Only later, she had grown up in the pack gardens, on the pack roads, on the cleared paths that Elder Moss had mapped out for young shifters. She had not learned the deep forest. The real forest, the miles of it that climbed the mountain beyond the property, was not a place she knew. She ran deeper. The trees closed overhead. Her own scent trail blurred in the moving air. She cast back and forth and found nothing familiar. When the panic moved through her, she did the one thing she could think to do. She shifted back. Human feet. Human senses. The forest, suddenly enormous and dark and full of sounds she could no longer read. She stepped on a root she couldn't see in the dark, felt her ankle wrench sideways, and went down. She sat on the leaf litter with her hands braced and her ankle throbbing, and the whole vast mountain pressing in around her, and thought, fine, absolutely fine. She felt him before she heard him. The particular change in the quality of the dark when something purposeful moved through it. Then a shape between the trees. A wolf, red-brown in the faint moonlight, moving with that same economy of motion she had already learned to recognize even in this form. He stopped several feet away. His eyes caught the ambient light, the way all wolf eyes did in the dark, not glowing but reflective, a flash of amber-warm light, like a large dog's eyes caught in a camera flash. In the dark of the forest, they were more visible than usual, and she found herself staring at them. He looked at her. She looked at him. "I twisted my ankle," she said unnecessarily. He shifted, crouched in front of her, caught her ankle in both hands before she could object, and ran his thumbs along the joint with a precision that told her he'd done field first aid more times than she ever wanted to imagine. "Not broken," he said. "Badly sprained." "I know." He sat back on his heels. "You didn't know the forest?" "No." "You should have." "I know that too." She met his eyes. "I was angry." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I was raised in camps. Wolf camps, field operations, processing a hunt where you stand. It's what we did. I don't—" He stopped, located the words as though they were objects he'd had to put down a long time ago. "I don't always account for a house. What a house means." She said nothing. Let him find his way through it. "What you said," he continued, "about mattering." His jaw tightened. "You matter. I know that's not something I've made clear." "No," she agreed quietly. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "Not an excuse, a statement of fact. I don't know how to live with someone, with a—" The word cost him something. "With a wife. I spent 3 years where everything was the next hour, the next mission. I don't know how to be this." Wren looked at him, crouching in the dark, with her ankle between his hands. "Then tell me what you do know how to be," she said, "and we'll start there." He held her gaze for a long moment. "I know how to keep watch," he said finally. "How to track, how to keep something safe." "Okay," she said. "That's a start." He picked her up, practical, careful, one arm behind her knees and one at her back, the way you'd carry someone who couldn't walk. She was too surprised to object. He carried her through the dark forest, as if he did this routinely, as if she weighed nothing, as if the trees themselves stepped aside. She didn't know what to do with her hands. She settled for her own lap. Above them, through the canopy, the moon was full and indifferent, and she thought about how strange it was. The mate bond, the wolf that ran when she was angry, the soldier who tracked her through the dark, because her pain had hit him like a signal, and he had come. He had come. At the porch steps, he set her down. "The curtains," he said behind her. She looked back. "I'll replace them." His voice was flat, but underneath it, careful. "And I'll use the processing area behind the barn. Vin uses it. I should have asked what the rules were." She looked at him in the porch light. "That would have been helpful," she said. "Yes." Something that was not quite a nod. He held the door open. She went inside. He followed. The house was quiet and still around them, smelling of gardenias from the open window, and Wren thought, "He came for me. He didn't have to. He could have let me find my own way back in the dark. But he had felt her pain through the bond, and he had come without hesitation, without asking for anything in return. That was not nothing. That was, she suspected, the beginning of something. She found the notebook by accident. She had not been looking for anything of his. She had been looking for the small trowel she had inexplicably left in the upstairs hallway. Her own organizational chaos was a gentle, ongoing embarrassment, and the notebook had slipped from beneath the edge of the dresser when she moved it to check underneath. Plain cover, military issue, his name on the inside front, written in a hand that was precise and controlled even in small format. Dates, map coordinates, shorthand she couldn't decode, and then names, not coordinates. Names written differently from the rest, larger with a character she recognized as personal in the spacing. Marcus D. Ellie Chen, Tobias W. Fenn, Reed, and 7 others that she read once and would remember. Below the last name, in handwriting that was slightly less controlled than the rest, written she understood in a different moment, under different weight, I was the only one. She stood in the upstairs hallway for a long time. She put the notebook back exactly where it had been. Exactly. She was very careful about the angle. Then she went downstairs and stood at the kitchen sink and looked out at the garden and breathed slowly and let herself understand what she now knew. He had lost all of them, his entire unit. He had come home from a war that had taken everyone he'd gone in with, and then this town had looked at him and said, "Here's a garden wolf. She'll fix you." As if grief was something that could be plucked out of a person and replaced with gardenias. As if the things that broke you in the dark responded to softness alone. She went outside, started digging a new bed along the east fence. Physical work, because she needed to put her hands in the soil when she didn't know what else to do with what she felt. She planted gardenias, her own, from her mother's cuttings, and then she pulled out her phone and searched, carefully and quietly, for the hometowns of the names she remembered. Marcus D. from somewhere in the Shenandoah, Ellie Chen from the Oregon coast, Tobias from a mountain town in Colorado, Fenn from the Gulf. She found the native flowers. Over the next week, she sourced what she could from the nursery in the next county. Mountain columbine for Colorado, sea lavender for the coast, wild bergamot for the valley, Gulf Coast cordgrass that she planted in a long decorative edge. She planted them without explaining why, without announcing what she was doing. She did not expect him to notice. He noticed. She was kneeling in the east bed on a Thursday afternoon when she heard him stop on the path behind her. She didn't turn, kept her hands in the dirt. "The columbine," he said. That's a mountain plant, not native here." "No," she agreed. Silence. Then, "Tobias was from a mountain town." She sat back on her heels and turned to look at him. He was standing at the edge of the bed, looking at the plants, and his face had done something she had not seen it do before. It had gone, very briefly and very quietly, young. "You knew," he said, not accusatory, just arriving at understanding. "I found the notebook," she said. "I didn't read more than the names. I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't have." He was quiet for so long she thought he might walk away. "They deserved better than what happened," he said, in a voice lower than his usual register. "Yes," she said. "They did. I couldn't—" He stopped. "There wasn't anything I could have done differently. I know that. I've been told that. But knowing something and believing it are different things," she finished quietly. He looked at her. Something opened in his face, not wide, not dramatic. A hairline crack in old plaster, but real, and she saw it, and she did not reach for it or press on it. She turned back to the garden. After a moment, she heard him lower himself to sit at the edge of the bed. Neither of them spoke. They stayed like that until the light went gold, her hands in the earth, his forearms resting on his knees, and the east garden full of someone else's hometown flowers blooming quietly in the Virginia afternoon. He started coming home earlier, not on time, not for dinner, not deliberately, but not after midnight either. She would be reading on the porch, and she would hear him on the path at 9, at 8:30, once at 7:55. And she would mark the page and say something ordinary like "it's warm tonight" or "there's food on the stove." And he would make a sound that was not quite a word, but not quite silence either. Progress, she told herself, infinitely patient progress. She began to understand his system. He counted doorways. She had noticed this weeks ago, filed it away. He always sat facing the room's entrance. He did not like sudden movement behind him, so she made a habit of speaking before she rounded a corner when he was in the house. He slept lighter than anyone she had ever known, and she had learned to move gently in the early mornings, boiling water by hand rather than using the kettle's loud click. She did not frame these things as burdens. They were maps. She was learning the map of him, the landscape of a person who had survived things she could only imagine, and carried those things in his body the way a river carried the shape of its original course. One evening she found him on the porch, which was new. He had not sat on the porch before. He was in the far chair, elbows on his knees, watching the garden in the last of the light with an expression she almost recognized. She brought 2 glasses of sweet tea and sat in the other chair and handed him one without asking. He took it. "The sea lavender," he said after a while. "For Ellie." "Yes." He turned the glass slowly in his hands. She grew up near the coast, talked about the water constantly. She said she could always find north by the sound of the ocean, even inland, that it stayed in her somehow. He paused. "She was the best tracker our unit had. Better than me. I told her so." Wren said nothing. Listened. "She would have liked to know someone planted something for her," he said. "She was someone who noticed things like that." He was quiet for a moment. "She would have liked you." Wren looked at him. She felt the words land the way certain things landed, not lightly, but with permanence. "Why did you do it?" he said. Not a question, a wondering. "Because they mattered," she said carefully. "And you carry them. And I—" She chose the next words with full attention. "I am your mate. What you carry, I carry too, even if I didn't know them." He looked at her. The evening light was on his face, and the reddish-brown of his eyes had gone warmer at the edges, amber and low, like the last of a fire that was finally burning what it was meant to burn. "That's more than I deserve," he said quietly. "I don't think it's about deserving," she said. "I think it's about choosing, every day, to show up for the person you made a promise to." She looked at her glass. "You came into the forest for me. I can plant flowers for the people you loved. That's what this is. That's what it's supposed to be." He was very still. "Wren," he said. It was the first time he had used her name. She went completely still. "Thank you," he said. Simple, direct and entirely sincere, the kind of thank you that came from a man who only said what he meant because he had long since stopped having the energy for anything else. She smiled, not wide, but real. "You're welcome, Colt," she said. She heard his breath shift. Neither of them moved for a long moment. The evening was full around them, crickets starting up in the tall grass, the first bats moving through the purple air above the garden, the smell of honeysuckle drifting up from the fence line where she had let it climb wild. She had always loved this hour, the between hour, not day, not night, the time that belonged to neither, and therefore to anything. She wondered if he had an hour like this, if there had been evenings in the field, in that other life, where the light went soft and he had been allowed, for just a moment, to stop being a soldier. She didn't ask. She was learning that some things would come when they were ready, and asking was the surest way to make them slow. "The lavender will bloom again in spring," she said instead. "All of it. The whole east bed. It'll be something." He looked at the bed. "Marcus," he said. "Shenandoah. You said wild bergamot. In the center. The lavender is around it." He nodded slowly. He was doing something she had started to recognize, mapping, the way he mapped everything, but not for threat assessment, for memory. He was placing them here, in this garden, in this soil, this light, this particular Blue Ridge evening. "They would have thought you were something," he said. "All of them. They would have—" He stopped, and something crossed his face, careful and raw at once. "They would have wanted to know you were here." She felt the weight of that like a gift she hadn't earned yet and would spend her whole life trying to deserve. "I'm glad you came back to us," she said. "To this place. I know it wasn't—" She paused. "I know coming home wasn't the same as coming back to something good at first." "No," he said honestly. "It wasn't. Is it better?" He turned to look at her, and in the dusk his eyes had gone fully amber, the reddish-brown lost to the last light. "Yes," he said. They sat on the porch as the sky went dark and the garden held its shapes in the last of the light, sweet tea warm in their hands, and neither of them spoke for a long time, and it was the most at peace she had felt since the night she had first seen him walk through a door and felt the world tilt on its axis. It did not happen all at once. That was the thing no one told you about closed people. They did not open like a door. They opened like a winter, 1 degree of warmth at a time, the change imperceptible day to day, and then startling in retrospect. He fixed the porch step that had been loose since they moved in. She found it one morning and pressed her finger against the new nail head and said nothing and added it to the column of things that were changing. He stopped eating alone, or rather, he stopped going elsewhere to eat. He still stood at the counter sometimes instead of sitting at the table, which she had quietly attributed to field habits, but he was in the house. He ate the food she made, and once, exactly once, he said it was good, in the tone of a man mildly surprised by his own opinion. She had learned not to make too much of these moments. That was the other thing nobody told you. Too much reaction to a closed person's opening was its own kind of pressure, and pressure was the one thing guaranteed to make them close again. She treated his kindnesses the way you treated wild things that came to the yard. You acknowledged them quietly, and you did not lunge. One morning she came down to find the kitchen already clean. He had washed the dishes she'd left to soak. Nothing dramatic, just the regular evening plates she hadn't gotten to, and stacked them in the rack with the same precision he brought to everything. She stood in the kitchen doorway, looking at the clean dishes, and felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't realized was still tight. He was trying, in his way, with his vocabulary of small actions and no explanations. He was trying. And then, the evening of the thunderstorm. It had been building all afternoon, the sky going bruised purple-green over the mountains, and Wren had been getting the last seedlings under cover when the rain hit. Not gradually, but all at once, a cold mountain curtain that soaked through her in seconds. She made it to the porch with an armload of pots and found the door already open. He was holding it. He had a towel. She didn't know where he'd found it. And when she stepped in, shedding her muddy shoes, he held it out. She took it and looked up at him, and he was looking at the pots in her arms with an expression she couldn't name. "I'll take those," he said. "I've got—" He already had half of them. They set the seedlings on the kitchen counter side by side, the storm throwing itself against the windows, and at some point she was aware that they were standing close enough that their arms were nearly touching, and neither of them stepped away. "The roof leaks," he said, not looking at her. "Northeast corner of the upstairs. I noticed it last week. I've been meaning to look at it. I'll take care of it tomorrow." She turned her head. He was very close. The kitchen was warm, and the rain was loud, and it smelled like wet earth and the tea she'd put on. "Colt," she said. Thank you. For all of it. The step, the dishes, coming to the porch." She paused. "For not leaving." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I keep coming back." "I know," she said. "I don't always know why." He said it honestly, without deflection. "Or I do, and I don't know what to do with it yet." She looked at him. He was still looking at the seedlings, his jaw set in the way it set when he was working something out. "That's okay," she said. "You don't have to know yet." Something in him seemed to settle. That night, for the first time, he got off the floor. She was already in bed, book open, pretending to read, when she heard him pause in the doorway and then cross the room with quiet deliberateness and lie down on top of the covers on the far side of the bed. He said nothing. She said nothing. She turned the page. The storm moved on across the mountains, and the house held them, and Wren lay in the dark and felt the mate bond warm and steady at the center of her chest and thought, "We are making something here." Slowly, by hand. The way you make anything that lasts. The morning he planted something was a Wednesday. Wren had gone to help her mother with a pack errand and came home earlier than expected, through the back gate, and stopped dead. He was crouched in the east garden bed with one of her trowels. He had found it. She had been looking for it for 3 days, and he had a seed packet open on the flat stone beside him and was reading the back of it with the focused concentration of a man studying a field brief. He read it, looked at the soil, read it again. He dug a row with precise depth and even spacing that was, she could tell, more methodical than her own. He planted marigolds. Not the ones she'd bought. She hadn't bought marigolds. These were new. He must have gotten them himself at some point without telling her. She watched him from the gate. Something happened in her chest that she had no name for, warm and enormous and slightly unbearable. She went in the front door, made noise with the cabinets, came out the back a minute later. He looked up. "You found the trowel," she said, "behind the watering can." "I've been looking for that." She came to the bed's edge, looked at the marigolds. "Nice choice." "They're pest repellent," he said. "Finn mentioned you'd had aphid problems. Marigolds help." "They do," she agreed. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Was there a specific reason you chose?" she began. "They were on sale," he said immediately. She pressed her lips together. "Okay. The aphids are a real problem. Extremely serious," she confirmed. "You were right to act." The corner of his mouth moved, a fractional, barely there twitch. The second time she had seen it, and she was increasingly certain it was what Colt Ashvane's version of a smile looked like. She sat at the bed's edge and started deadheading lavender beside his marigold row. They worked in companionable silence for 20 minutes. It was the easiest 20 minutes they had yet shared. No weight to it, no performance, just two people in a garden, in the afternoon, doing what needed doing. That evening, the radio was on low. He was standing at the kitchen counter, and she was at the table, and the moments stretched between them the way certain late afternoon moments did, the kind where nothing is required, and so something real can happen. "That song," he said. She looked up. He was listening with a stillness that was different from his usual vigilance, softer. "Ellie used to sing this in camp," he said. "She was terrible, completely wrong on the tune, didn't know half the words, but she sang it like she was performing at the Grand Ole Opry every time." He was quiet for a moment. "I hadn't thought about that in a long time." He said it with something like wonder. A man finding a room in a house he thought he'd mapped completely. "That's a good thing to remember," Wren said softly. He turned from the counter. She did not know, later, which of them moved first. One moment they were on opposite sides of the kitchen, and then they were not. And she had a memory of his hand coming up to the side of her face, and the rough warmth of it against her cheek, and then his mouth was on hers. It was not a long kiss. It was careful and brief, and entirely, completely still. And then he pulled back and looked at her with an expression she had never seen before on his face, open, completely unguarded. She put her hand over his, still at her cheek. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi," he said. She smiled. He looked down at her hand on his, and something moved through him. She felt it in the bond, warm and certain and slightly overwhelming. "Wren," he said very quietly. "I know," she said. "Me too." She didn't know exactly what she was answering, but she thought he did. And she thought she did. And maybe that was enough, that they were standing in the kitchen in the rainlight with the radio playing Ellie's song, and he had kissed her like it was a question, and she had kissed him back like it was an answer. And the mate bond sang in her bones, and for the first time since the night in Moss's great room, she let herself feel the full warmth of it without fear. For the first time she thought, "This is exactly right." She came on a Thursday morning. Wren was in the garden when the black wolf appeared at the fence line, not from the pack's usual approach paths, but from the deep forest, moving with a fluid efficiency that spoke of years in that form. The wolf was large for a female, deliberately built. She shifted at the gate. The woman who stood there was striking in the way people with absolute certainty in themselves were always striking. Dark-haired, precise, in a jacket that still looked like field gear, even without insignia. She had a scar along her forearm, and she surveyed the garden, and then Wren, with the calm, measuring gaze of someone conducting a reconnaissance. "Vera Ashford," she said. "I served with Colt." Wren set down her trowel and straightened. "Wren Ashvane. Come in." She did not offer tea. Vera came through the gate. She looked at the garden with an expression Wren filed carefully. Not contempt, not quite. Something more complicated. The look of someone encountering a world they had categorically refused to want, and finding it harder to dismiss than expected. She looked at the gardenias. She looked at the marigolds. Something moved across her face and was gone. "He's inside," Wren said. "I'll get him." "I know," Vera said. "I could hear him from the tree line." She stood in the garden with her arms at her sides and waited. Colt came out. The change in him was immediate and visible. Not warmth, but recognition. The way soldiers knew each other in civilian spaces, a shared grammar with no translation. He looked at Vera, and he looked at Wren, and something passed through him that he did not entirely conceal. "Ashford," he said. "Ashvane." Vera's eyes moved from him to Wren and back. "Can we speak privately?" Not a question. Colt looked at Wren. Wren met his eyes for a long moment. Then she went inside. She made coffee and did not press her ear to the door, because she was not that kind of person and because she trusted him. But she stood at the kitchen window where she could see the garden, and she watched Vera speak. And she watched how Vera watched him while she spoke, and she understood clearly and without the comfort of doubt what she was looking at. This was not a woman delivering a mission briefing. This was a woman who had spent 3 years in proximity to Colt Ashvane, 3 years of shared danger and the particular intimacy of survival, and had come here to see what she was up against. And Wren understood, looking out her kitchen window, that she herself was what Vera was up against. The gardenias, the marigolds, the curtains he'd replaced, and the porch step he'd fixed, and the 2 mugs on the counter every morning. She looked at her own kitchen. She had not built any of this strategically. She had built it because this was her home, and because loving someone was not a campaign. It was a practice, daily and unglamorous, and entirely worth it. She wondered if Vera knew that. She thought, watching through the glass, that Vera had learned a kind of love that looked like strategy because she had lived in a world where everything looked like strategy. She did not hate her for it. She was not going to move, either. 20 minutes later he came in. His face had reset to something close to the early version of it, careful and contained, and she felt the loss of the open expression like a physical withdrawal. "She has intelligence about a remaining coalition threat," he said. "Pack security. She needs experienced trackers. 3 weeks, maybe less." 3 weeks, Wren said. "Maybe less." She looked at him. "And you said?" "I came to tell you first." Something moved through her. He had come to her first. "Do you trust her?" she asked. A beat. "She's good in the field." Not a yes, she noticed. "Is the threat real?" "I don't have reason to doubt her." She held his gaze. "I don't want you to go," she said plainly and without making it complicated. "I want to say that clearly. I don't want you to go." His jaw worked. "But I understand duty," she continued. "If this is real and you're needed, I'll be here when you get back." She held his eyes. "Just come back." He crossed the kitchen. He put his hands on her face and looked at her for a long time. 3 weeks, he said. "I'll be back." "Okay," she said. He kissed her, careful and deliberate and warm, and then said against her forehead, "The marigolds need watering every 2 days. The north bed, the soil drains fast there." She laughed despite everything. "I know how to water plants." "I know." The corner of his mouth moved. "I just like saying it." She held that image while she watched him pack. She held it while she watched him and Vera leave together through the tree line, Vera glancing back once from the gate with an expression that told Wren everything. She put her hands in the soil. She kept the garden alive. The first week, she told herself many times, was fine. She watered the marigolds every 2 days, the north bed precisely, because he had asked her to, and because the asking had been its own kind of love, even if neither of them had called it that yet. She attended pack meetings and ran the errands she'd always run, and sat on the porch in the evenings, composing letters in her head that she had no address to send. Things she had not said yet, that she had been afraid of him at first, that she wasn't anymore. That the morning in the kitchen with the radio had replayed in her memory every single hour since. That she had gone to sleep 3 nights in a row, thinking about the way he'd said her name, Wren, like he meant it in a way names weren't usually meant. She had not expected to miss him this much. She had expected the mate bond to ache at distance. She had known that was coming, but this was something more specific than the bond's pull. This was missing the sound of his footsteps in the hallway, missing the coffee grinder at 5:50, missing the companionable quiet of 2 people in a garden, not speaking, not needing to. She had not realized she had grown accustomed to him until he wasn't there. The pack began to give her odd looks in the 2nd week, small, quickly concealed. But Wren had grown up in Harlan's Creek, and she knew how to read the language of people who knew something you didn't. She asked Finn on a Tuesday, when he came to help with the barn roof. Vera Ashford filed the operation through an outside coalition contact, Finn said, not through Elder Moss. Wren was very still. Why would she bypass Moss? Because Moss would have asked whether the threat was verified, Finn said carefully, before he signed off on sending Colt specifically. And was it? Wren asked. Verified? Finn looked at the roof. She sat with that silence for a long time after he climbed down from the barn. She sat with the shape of it and what it meant, and she was not surprised. She had felt it, watching through the kitchen window. But knowing a thing and having it confirmed were 2 different experiences. She called Moss that evening, calmly. The facts in the right order, no extra weight. The way she'd watched her mother handle difficult things all her life. Moss listened without interrupting. "I'll make inquiries," he said. The inquiries came back before the 3rd week ended. The coalition threat was real, Moss told her. A minor border irregularity, already resolved before Colt and Vera had even arrived. It had not required Colt's specific skills or a 3-week deployment. Colt should have been back 5 days ago. Moss had reached him through the coalition relay, and he was on his way home. Wren sat in the east garden after the call. She sat among the columbine for Tobias and the sea lavender for Ellie and the marigolds that Colt had planted, because the aphids were a real problem and they were on sale, and she let herself feel the full shape of what had happened. Vera had loved him. She had gone to war beside him and come back changed, the way war changed everyone, and she had found him bound to someone else, and she had done a desperate thing. The kind of thing people did when they wanted something they couldn't have and refused to accept the wanting as its own kind of answer. Wren understood the human part of it. She understood grief and longing and the fear of watching something slip away. She had lived with her own version of that fear every day of this marriage, but she did not accept what Vera had done. She set her jaw. She had watered his flowers every 2 days and kept this house alive, and she had not spent 3 weeks waiting to be claimed. She had spent 3 weeks choosing this every morning, which was different, which was the only thing that had ever been different about her, the thing people called gentleness and mistook for weakness. She chose and kept choosing and did not stop. When he came home, he would find her here, not diminished, not afraid, here. The mate bond broke at dawn on a Thursday. Not broke, fractured. A hairline crack through the warmth she had carried in her chest for 3 weeks, like a low fire banked carefully, tended the way she tended everything she refused to let die. It did not go out, but it changed quality, going thin and far and stretched in a way that told her exactly one thing. He was coming home. She had known he would. She had never stopped believing it. But something had shifted in the past week that she had not told Finn, had not told Moss, had not told anyone, not because she was hiding it, but because she had not fully found words for it yet. The bond had gone quiet in a way that was not distance. It had gone quiet the way a person went quiet when they were deciding something, and whatever Colt Ashvane was deciding out there in the field, he was deciding it alone, without her. She understood that. She was trying to understand it without letting it harden into something she couldn't soften later. She had spent 3 weeks in this house, their house, the one she had made theirs with her hands and her patience and the daily practice of choosing it. And she had understood slowly that she had done everything she knew how to do. She had planted. She had stayed. She had kept the marigolds alive exactly as he had asked, the north bed every 2 days, because that was who she was and because she had made a promise. But there was a limit to what staying could carry on its own. She had been thinking about that on the porch on Wednesday evening when Finn came with the inquiry results, that Colt was 3 days out, that everything Vera had done was confirmed and documented and would be addressed formally by the council upon his return. Finn had looked at her carefully. "You okay?" "Yes," she said. And she was. But there was something underneath the okay that she was still working out. Something about what it meant to love a person who had spent 3 years learning to leave and was only now, haltingly, learning to stay. Something about what it meant to be the one who stayed so completely that the other person always had room to go. Had she made it too easy to leave? She did not think that was quite right. She believed in making things easy for the people she loved. She believed in patience and space and the slow work of trust. But she had been so careful, so relentlessly, deliberately careful, not to ask too much of him, not to push, not to want too loudly, and she wondered if, in her carefulness, she had communicated something false, that she would always be here, rooted and waiting no matter what, not as a choice she made each morning, but as a given, a constant he didn't have to tend. She was not a given. She went inside. She stood in the kitchen for a long time, looking at the 2 mugs on the counter, the cookbook that had migrated from the shelf to the workspace, the mat with 2 sets of mud. She went upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the closed window, the one she always left open 3 inches in any weather below 70 because she needed to hear the night. And she thought about the night he'd gotten off the floor, the way he'd done it carefully, as though he wasn't sure he was allowed, the way she'd turned the page of her book and pretended not to notice. She had felt, underneath the pretending, something enormous and worth protecting. She still felt it. But she also felt this. She was not a stopping point. She was not a place you passed through on the way to yourself. She was his mate. And she was asking, quietly, in the only language she knew, for him to come home, like he meant it. She wasn't angry. She was clear, and clarity she had learned a long time ago in a garden was its own kind of strength. By Thursday morning, the bond had gone from thin to taut. He was closer now. She felt it in the white wolf that almost never spoke but was speaking, low and certain and patient and old. She went to the garden. She kneeled in the east bed, among the columbine and the sea lavender and the wild bergamot, and she put her hands in the soil, and she let herself want, fully, without the careful management she had applied to every feeling for 3 months. She let herself want him to come back, like a man who had made his choice, not like a man still deciding. She let herself want to be chosen. Then she stood. She brushed the soil from her hands, and she left a single gardenia on his pillow, and she walked into the Blue Ridge morning, and she let the white wolf carry her into the trees. She did not go far. She would not go far. This was her territory, her ground, her mountain. But she stepped back, and she waited to see if he would come. He smelled it before he saw it. He was still 50 yards from the gate when the scent hit him. Not gardenias, not the particular sweetness of her that he had learned to locate in the dark from 100 yards out. What hit him was wrong scent. Foreign wolves, territorial aggression pressed into the bark of the fence posts, the sharp chemical edge of a confrontation that had not gone well for one side. He was running before he finished the thought. The gate was off its hinges. He registered that in a single glance and kept moving through the gap across the yard and stopped. The garden was destroyed, not the whole of it. The east bed, her east bed, the one with the columbine and the sea lavender and the marigolds he had planted because the aphids were a real problem and they were on sale. The east bed had been torn through the center like something large had moved through it at speed, and the soil was churned, and the plants along the edge were flattened in a wide arc. His marigolds were still standing. Her gardenias, the ones closest to the house, were untouched. But the path between the gate and the porch told a story he knew how to read. Multiple sets of tracks, 4, possibly 5, large, bigger than pack standard. The rival clan's scent underneath all of it, unmistakable now that he was close enough, the same territorial marker he had catalogued months ago when their leader had stood in their gathering hall and looked at Wren like she was something that could be moved. His jaw tightened. The porch railing was cracked, the far post, the one nearest the steps. Something had hit it, or someone had been thrown against it. He went through the front door. The inside was worse. The kitchen table was overturned. 2 of the chairs were on their sides. The curtains he had replaced, the ones he had replaced because he had walked through the house with a bore and she had finally told him the truth of what she needed, were half torn from the rod, hanging at an angle. The coffee mugs were on the floor. One of them was broken. He stood in the kitchen of their house and looked at the broken mug, and something moved through him that was not the mate bond, and was not field instinct, and was not the soldier's cold assessment he had spent 3 years honing into reflex. It was simpler than any of those things. It was, she was alone. She was here alone, and they came, and she did not know how to fight, and I was not here. He moved through the house in 30 seconds, systematic, room by room, the way he had been trained. No one inside, no sign of injury beyond the kitchen. She had run. The back door was unlatched, swinging slightly in the afternoon air, and the garden behind the house showed the impression of a smaller form moving fast toward the tree line. She had shifted. She had run into the mountains in wolf form. The story continues on Patreon. The link is pinned in the comments. And if this story moved you, leave a like and subscribe. New stories every week right here on Love Under the Full Moon.